April 1941. Over the gray skies of occupied France, the scream of engines tears through the clouds. A formation of British Wellington bombers struggled to hold altitude, their engines coughing, their gunners firing wildly into the haze. From above, a pair of German Messerschmitt Bf 109s dive like falcons, sunlight glinting off their canopies. One of them, painted in the dull yellow of JG-26, is flown by Oberleutnant Hans Meyer, 23 years old, a veteran of 40 missions, and one of the Luftwaffe's rising stars. He's fast, precise, and ruthless. But this morning, high above the channel, he's about to make an observation that will change the course of the air war and eventually save thousands of lives, including those of his enemies. Meyer lines up his shot, the twin MG-131 spitting fire. The bomber below shudders, black smoke curling from its right engine. But as it begins to drop, Meyer notices something odd. The bomber's undercarriage, its landing gear, hangs half extended. The British crew must have been preparing for a forced landing, or perhaps it was damaged in the attack. Yet, as he watches through his gun sight, something unexpected happens. The bomber steadies itself. The drag from the lowered wheels seems to slow its descent, giving the crew just enough control to level off. The aircraft limps toward the coast, barely staying in the air. Meyer doesn't shoot again. Instead, he watches, intrigued, as the British plane, trailing smoke, disappears into the cloud layer below. He returns to base, his mind racing. In every briefing, in every combat report, the word landing gear is never mentioned. It's not part of the battle. But now, for the first time, Meyer wonders, what if it could be? What if something as simple as the way an aircraft landed or absorbed impact could change who lived and who died in the sky? That night at the Luftwaffe airfield in Lille, Meyer sketches a rough idea on a scrap of paper, a spring-loaded shock system, stronger, lighter, with an angled retraction that could absorb more force on impact. To most pilots, it's meaningless. To engineers, it's an impossible dream. But Meyer, stubborn and sharp-eyed, can't let it go. The idea obsesses him. He spends his off hours in the maintenance hangars, talking with ground crews, asking about hydraulics, struts, and load distribution. Most of them laugh. You're a pilot, not an engineer, they say. But Meyer sees something they don't, a connection between how planes take off, land, and survive damage midair. He knows that bombers crash not only because of enemy fire, but because of landing failures after returning from missions riddled with holes. Every flight ends with a landing, he thinks. And if that landing can be made safer, even after catastrophic damage, it could save hundreds of crews. By late 1942, Meyer's idea began to take shape. The Luftwaffe's engineers at Messerschmitt's Augsburg plant are working on the new Me-410 heavy fighter, a twin-engine upgrade from the older 110. Meyer, now a test pilot, convinces an engineer named Ernst Kolbo to listen to his theory. He proposes a landing gear with independent shock compression, a system that allows one wheel to absorb impact even if the other collapses. Normally that would twist the fuselage and tear the wing apart, but with Meyer's angled strut geometry, the stress would distribute through the aircraft's frame. Kolbe is skeptical, but Meyer insists on a prototype. After weeks of paperwork, they get permission to test a modified undercarriage on a non-combat trainer. On the first attempt, the hydraulic system leaks. On the second, the left wheel jams mid-retraction. On the third, the aircraft lands hard, too hard, and the gear holds. It bends, groans, but doesn't snap. The aircraft skids to a halt. Meyer climbs out grinning, covered in dust, and yells, "It works!" But his superiors aren't impressed. To them, a better landing gear doesn't win wars. They want faster engines, more cannons, thicker armor. Hitler's aviation program is stretched thin, and no one is interested in a pilot's pet project. Meyer's reports are filed, forgotten, buried in technical archives. Within months, his squadron was transferred to the Eastern Front. Meyer's new mission: intercept Soviet bombers over Kursk. The front is brutal. Temperatures drop to 20 below zero. Engines freeze, men vanish, and planes crash not from bullets, but from the cold. Again and again, Meyer sees the same horror: aircraft forced to land in open fields, gear collapsing, fuselages snapping in half, crews trapped in fire. He watches men survive battle only to die on the ground. His frustration boils over. In a letter to Colby, he writes, "We perfect the art of killing, but ignore the science of surviving." Meanwhile, across the channel, British engineers are facing a similar nightmare. By 1943, the RAF Bomber Command has lost over 8,000 aircraft. Most losses don't occur during dogfights, but during landings after missions. Bombers limping home, engines shot out, hydraulics gone, forced to belly flop on grass fields. Ground crews call it the killer landing. A single broken strut can tear through a fuel line and ignite the aircraft. Statistically, nearly 1 in 5 bombers lost in Britain were destroyed during landing attempts. The engineers at Vickers, Avro, and de Havilland are desperate for solutions, but they're running out of time and steel. Then, in late 1943, an odd set of blueprints arrives via captured German documents. It's labeled a Messerschmitt shock absorption test, model variant 41B. The British analysts, expecting another engine design, instead find detailed sketches of an unorthodox landing gear, asymmetrical, angled, almost alien-looking. It's signed Oberleutnant Hans Meyer. British intelligence had intercepted many enemy prototypes before, but this one was different. Instead of focusing on takeoff performance or aerodynamics, it was about survivability, a feature that could help damaged aircraft land intact. The RAF's engineering branch sends it to Farnborough for analysis. At first, they assume it's sabotage. Why would a German officer propose a system that made aircraft safer? But the math checks out. Meyer's design redistributes impact force away from the fuselage, preventing catastrophic breaks. The British engineers are stunned. They test it on a mock-up, then on a spare Wellington bomber. The results are immediate. The aircraft lands hard, one wheel collapses, but the fuselage stays intact. Instead of snapping like a twig, the bomber slides safely. Within weeks, they begin adapting the designs. They simplify it, replacing the German hydraulic system with British pneumatics, but the core idea remains: independent shock absorption, flexible load bearing. By January 1944, the first modified Lancasters roll out with the Meyer strut, though the RAF never calls it that officially. They label it the flex recoil undercarriage. And almost immediately, the results are staggering. Bombers returning from night raids over Hamburg, Cologne, and the Ruhrland in conditions that would have been fatal months before. In one squadron alone, crash landing fatalities dropped by 60%. Crews begin to notice. "She touches down softer now," one pilot reports, "even with half a wheel gone." By April 94, the Air Ministry estimates that nearly 1,200 aircraft had been saved from destruction during landing attempts. The number grows with every month. By war's end, more than 10,000 British bombers are recorded as crash saved by improved undercarriage systems derived from captured German engineering. But back in Germany, Meyer never learns this. His squadron is decimated in early 1940. During a return flight from the Eastern Front, his Me-410 suffers engine failure over Poland. He crash lands in a frozen field, the kind of landing his design was meant to prevent. The left gear collapses. The fuselage breaks apart. Meyer survives barely, with a shattered leg and burns across his face. He spends the rest of the war in a military hospital near Munich, forgotten by the command he once served. When Germany falls in 1945, the Allied investigators scour Messerschmitt's records and find his name again. They assume he's dead. He's not. Meyer is alive, limping, bitter, but alive. He's questioned by Allied engineers who show him a photograph of a Lancaster bomber with the modified landing gear. "Did you design this?" they ask. He looks at the photo, stares for a long time, and smiles faintly. "You could say that," he replies. The irony isn't lost on him. His design, born from curiosity in the skies over France, is now saving the very bombers he once tried to shoot down. Years later, British test pilot George Clay recalls that conversation in an interview. "He didn't seem angry," Clay said. "He just said, at least it helped someone." In the aftermath of the war, the Allied scientific teams absorbed mountains of captured German data, jet engines, rocket blueprints, submarine systems, and buried among them, Meyer's notes on stress absorption and gear design. The principles behind it would influence post-war aviation for decades. The first commercial aircraft to adopt similar technology was the de Havilland Comet, followed by the Boeing 707, both featuring adaptive landing gear shock systems directly inspired by wartime innovations. In time, Meyer's work becomes a footnote in engineering history, but its impact is immeasurable. Halfway through the war, no one could have imagined that a single pilot's crazy idea, ignored by his own superiors, would end up protecting the very bombers he was sworn to destroy. The men who came home from raids over Berlin, from night flights through flak and fighter fire, owed their lives to an enemy who saw beyond the war, who cared more about the machine's survival than its mission. Before we continue, if you're the kind of person who loves untold stories like this, moments of humanity buried inside the chaos of war, make sure you subscribe. We share incredible real history every week, stories that show how small ideas can change thousands of lives. So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and let's keep going. After the war, Meyer disappeared from public record. Some say he worked quietly for a French engineering firm under an assumed name. Others believe he was recruited by the British under Operation Surgeon, a smaller, lesser-known counterpart to the American Operation Paperclip. What's certain is that his concepts didn't vanish. In 1947, the Royal Aircraft Establishment publishes a confidential report titled Post-War Evaluation of Adaptive Undercarriage Systems. Among its citations is German Test Pilot Concept, 1941, Recovered Augsburg Archives. That concept forms the backbone of post-war aircraft safety studies. By the early 1950s, aviation was entering its golden age. Jetliners, swept wings, transatlantic flight. But the lessons of war remained built into every rivet and strut. Engineers studying accident survivability reference Meyer's geometry. The same angled compression that saved bombers now keeps commercial jets from collapsing under uneven load. When a Boeing 707 landed with one gear jammed in 1959 and the fuselage stayed intact, an internal report quietly noted, redistributed load absorption per design proven concept. They never said where the concept came from. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Hamburg, an older man with a limp sits by a window, listening to the distant roar of new jet engines. His name isn't on any monuments, his medals are long gone, and his homeland is divided. But sometimes, when he reads about a bomber crew walking away from a crash, he smiles. Crazy idea, he mutters. Maybe not so crazy after all. The war had taught him a truth that few soldiers ever admit, that the line between enemy and ally is sometimes just an engineering drawing away. The same forces that destroy can, when seen from a different angle, protect. His landing gear idea wasn't about sides or nations. It was about survival, about the fragile machine that carried men through the sky and brought them home. In the archives of the RAF Museum in London today, among blueprints and technical manuals, there's a folder labeled Captured German Undercarriage Concepts, 1943. Inside, faded sketches show the same angled strut and shock absorber geometry. In pencil, one note stands out, written in English by an RAF engineer. Tested, works, thank God. No one knows exactly how many lives Hans Meyer's invention saved. The official estimates put it at around 10,000 British bomber crewmen who survived landings that would have otherwise been fatal. But the real number is probably higher. Each of those survivors went on to have families, children, grandchildren, generations that exist because one man refused to stop thinking about how to land safely. War often celebrates the destroyers, the aces, the generals, the inventors of weapons. But sometimes the true hero is the one who builds something that helps others live. Meyer never received recognition from his own country. The Luftwaffe didn't reward failure, and in their eyes, he was a failure. A pilot who questioned orders, who cared more about saving planes than shooting them down. But history had other plans. His design became part of the foundation of modern aviation safety, influencing everything from military transports to commercial jets to spacecraft landing gear. There's an old saying among pilots, takeoff is optional, landing is mandatory. Hans Meyer understood that better than anyone. His crazy idea, a piece of steel, a few angles, a simple question, ended up bridging enemies, crossing borders, and saving more lives than any bullet ever could. Decades later, when historians dig through archives of wartime engineering, they keep finding small notes in the margins, unnamed contributions, forgotten test results, anonymous blueprints. But once in a while, a name reappears. And beside Myers, one comment written by a British engineer stands out. Enemy or not, he was one of us. In the end, that's what his legacy became. A reminder that innovation doesn't care about nationality, that even in the darkest times, an act of creation can outlive destruction. The war that consumed millions left behind rare moments of shared humanity, and Hans Meyer's landing gear was one of them. His idea didn't win a battle, didn't change a strategy, didn't shorten the war, but it did something greater. It gave thousands of men a chance to see another dawn. And maybe that's the real victory, the quiet kind, measured not in explosions or medals, but in safe landings, in fathers coming home, in bombers touching down on broken runways with their crews still alive. Because somewhere in the sky over France, a young German pilot once saw a wounded bomber trying to land and decided there had to be a better way.